What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here, back with some more hockey content. And for today's video, we are continuing our divisional rankings, our standings predictions for the upcoming NHL 2023-2024 season. For today's video, we're covering all things Central Division. So we're going to be ranking the Central Division teams from 8 to 1, worst team in the division, to who I predict will be the best team in the Central. Now, this is a division that I consider to be probably the weakest in the NHL. There's a lot of teams, especially in the middle of the pack there, that I'm not really sure what their futures lie in terms of where they rank in the NHL. A lot of these teams are in rebuilding phases, some are retooling, and others I'm not quite sure. But anyway, let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video, starting with my 8th place team in the Central. Let's go. So 8th place in the Central, the worst team in the Central. No surprise here to anybody. I'm going with the Chicago Blackhawks, 27-47-8 record for 62 points. And I have them as the second worst team in the NHL. Not much else to say. This roster is just not good enough on paper. They did make some very solid additions, however, but it's not going to carry them over the hump into being all of a sudden a playoff team. I mean, the big addition was drafting Connor Bedard first overall. I mean, he is definitely the front runner to win the Calder Trophy. He's the next Connor McDavid as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he's a generational talent for a reason. He probably could be hovering around a point per game as a rookie, like McDavid did, even though he was hurt. But then, he followed that up with a 100-point season. So Connor Bedard definitely has that ceiling to be one of the best players in the league. At some point in his career, probably will be a top 3, top 5 player in the NHL. But overall, this is still a rebuilding team that's really just starting to put their team together. Like I said, they added some decent veteran pieces to make the team, I guess, a little bit more mature and I guess a little bit more competitive than they were last year, although I don't have them improving that much because I still think defensively and in goal, they're among the worst in the NHL. Unless a guy like Arvid Soderblom can really take the reins as a full-time starter and elevates his play, I think, he probably has a decent future to be a starting goalie for the Hawks. But apart from that, there's still some deficiencies on the defensive end. But one thing that they are definitely going to improve on is their offense. When you add a guy like Connor Bedard, former number 1 overall pick, I think he should push for a point per game. I think it's going to be hard to produce over a point per game given the surrounding talent that Chicago currently doesn't quite have. But I do have him scoring 34 goals, leading the team. I think he is a prolific goal scorer. He will be over the course of his career. 73 points, I think, is very solid. I don't think I'm going to go too crazy with him having 80-plus points. I know a lot of people think he could be well over a point per game to start his career. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We have to really see how this 18-year-old kid pans out right out of the gates in the NHL. It's not easy to do, for a guy that young to just automatically pop off and show everybody he's the best in the league. I don't think it's going to take a little bit of time for him to, get to that level. But in terms of the other guys I have leading the team in scoring, Taylor Hall, I got second. He was a big acquisition, I think, in an elevated role. Most likely could be playing on the top line with Connor Bedard. He's going to get a lot of assists, and therefore I think he has well over 60 points this season. I just think, again, he's be sharing the ice with Connor Bedard, who is the best goal scorer on the team automatically. And Taylor Hall is a very good playmaker in his own right, so he should get a lot of points through that. Being a third-line guy in Boston, obviously, he'll be playing on the top line on the Hawks for sure, given how little depth they have up front. And then Lucas Reichel's another guy having a breakout season, first full season for him. I think he should surpass north of 50 points. The Hawks are pretty high on this guy. A guy who's been in the prospect pool for a while. Athanasiou is a guy who could score 20 to 25 goals and get near 50 points. I think his production can elevate just a little bit more, especially, Connor Bedard, Taylor Hall. They added some good offensive pieces to maybe get these guys going a little bit more. And then rounding out the top 5, I got Seth Jones. I still think he's a good enough offensive defenseman. I guess his defensive game has been a little bit lackluster, but I still think on this Hawks team, 40 points is definitely achievable. Like I said, this is still a rebuilding team. This is not a team I expect to contend for a cup anytime soon. They're building from within with their young guys, Connor Bedard leading the way, but ultimately I do have the Hawks last in the Central. Next up, 7th in the Central, maybe a bit of a hot take. I'm actually going with the St. Louis Blues. In fact, I think they're going to have a worse season than last year. I think last season was a complete disappointment for me. I mean, I had them ranked very high. The year before, coming off a second round exit, pushed the Avalanche, the eventual Stanley Cup champions of 2022, to 6 games. And I thought the Blues were in a prime position to at least repeat that season. I thought they were one of the best teams in the league. Entering last season, I think I had them as a top 5 team in the NHL. And wow, what a difference a year could do, because I think right now I have him bottom 5 in the NHL. So yeah, I'm just not sold on this Blues roster whatsoever. I think offensively they're decent. I don't think they're a bad offensive team. They have a lot of really solid point-producing players, especially on that top line, which we'll get into a little bit later. But in terms of the defense and the goaltending, it's among the worst in the league. Jordan Binnington really hasn't been anywhere close to what he was in his rookie season. Since then, he's just been gradually declining, and last year especially was a really tough season for him. And on defense, they have some point-producing guys like the likes of Justin Falk and Torrey Krug, and even Colton Parayko's a decent 30-35 point defenseman. But on the defensive end, these guys, they don't get the job done. So these guys have issues keeping the puck out of their net, and that's ultimately going to be a huge detriment to this Blues team this season. So 33, 42, and 7 record. I have them with just 73 points. And yes, a bottom 5 team in the NHL, in my opinion. Like I mentioned before, the one thing that's going to keep this Blues team relevant throughout the course of the season is their offense, especially adding Kevin Hayes, who's coming off a really solid year with the Flyers last year. He could be someone who could plug in into their top 6 or maybe center their third line, mix their offense a lot deeper. But yeah, that's really the only bright spot for this Blues team. Like I mentioned, defense and goaltending is not going to get the job done. But in terms of their offense, I think they have a lot of guys that can produce. Leading the way, I got Pavel Buchnevich. He's been basically above a point per game since getting traded to the Blues, so I see no reason why he can't do that again. If he plays the full season, I have him scoring 84 points. Jordan Kyrou, I have him leading the team in goals with 39, 79 points as well. He should get his numbers. Robert Thomas, probably the best playmaker on the team. He's going to have north of 50 assists, so I have him scoring 72 points. He's a solid number 1 center. Again, the defense is a bit questionable, but offensively, he's going to produce his numbers. Then I have a huge breakout year for Jacob Vrana. I think he really bounced back well since getting acquired by the Blues. I believe he played 20 games last year with them. He had 10 goals, 14 points. I think if he, plays a full season to his potential, I think he's very much capable of scoring north of 30 goals. That's why I have him scoring 35 and over 60 points. I think this is just a good situation for him on the offensive end. Again, the Blues are going to get their offensive numbers. And then Braden Shen round out the top 5. He's a 60-point player in my estimation. Still in the prime of his career. Very solid second-line center. Ultimately, this team is not bad enough to be rebuilding, and it doesn't look like they are. I don't think by any means are they a Stanley Cup contender anymore. I just don't like the direction of this team. I'm not really sure where they're heading. You can't get more directionless than the St. Louis Blues, honestly, in the NHL. It just seems like they're stuck in no man's land. They're not really making any sort of big waves. Maybe they'll trade some other defensemen to maybe start a rebuild. I'm not really sure, because they do have a bit of an older roster compared to most of those teams that are lower in the standings. So the Blues I'm a little bit concerned about. I think they have a pretty dark future, and this season I only see them regressing because there's certain teams in the Central that I think have improved a little bit. And we'll get into the next one here. But yeah, I got the Blues in 7th, only 73 points, having a very miserable season. So 6th in the Central, this is the team I was talking about that I think is going to leapfrog the St. Louis Blues. I got the Arizona Coyotes in 6th, 32, 39, 11 for 75 points. They're among the most improved teams in the entire NHL. But by no means do I think they're anywhere close to a playoff spot. I think maybe a lot of people think because of the weakness of the Central Division and the Western Conference for that matter, the Coyotes might have a shot to sneak into the playoffs. I don't think they're there yet, but this certainly is a team with a very bright future and a lot of big name players up and coming on this roster. Looking at the offseason additions, they had an absolute overhaul of their roster, really shoring up their forward group. Already they have a lot of solid prospects up and coming. Obviously, Barrett Hayton is on his way up. Matias Maccelli's coming off a very underrated rookie season. I expect him to have just as good of a year, if not better. And bringing in Logan Cooley, Dylan Gunther to that forward group is going to be just that much better. They're going to be a much more prolific offensive team, a very exciting young team. And then adding some depth pieces in Jason Zucker and Alexander Kerfoot. This has the potential to be one of the best top 9s in the NHL as far as I'm concerned. And they added some very solid pieces on the blue line. Although Matt Dumba's coming off possibly the worst season of his career, still think he has some to give, at least on the defensive end. So I think that's an underrated signing for them to really help their blue line, as well as getting Sean Durzi, acquiring him from the Los Angeles Kings. A little bit of a defensive liability, but is still capable of producing 30-plus points. I believe he could be the guy quarterback in the top unit, so maybe there's some offensive upside there that he has yet to unleash. and maybe he has the potential to maybe crack north of 40, 45 points if he is that main offensive puck mover on the Coyotes this season. I think he definitely has that potential to low-key break out. And combine that with the solid goaltending that they do have with Karel Vedmelka, I think he's a very underrated goalie, and honestly, he could definitely elevate his play and make the Coyotes that much more of a threat to potentially push for a playoff spot. So that's why the Coyotes are maybe a sexy pick to make a substantial improvement up the standings. I'm a little bit more of a pessimist. I'm not exactly sure if they're going to make a significant jump in the standings, but however, I still like the roster. They're probably among the most improved teams, if not the most improved team, at least on paper in the NHL. So very excited to see where the Coyotes go from here. In terms of their top 5 scorers, no surprise here. Clayton Keller, I think he's going to have an even better season than last year. He's officially arrived as a legit superstar in this league. It took him a little bit of a while, but he's finally here. Have him scoring north of 40 goals, over 90 points. I think he's just that elite of a talent. Nick Schmaltz, when healthy, he's had trouble staying healthy, I know, but if he does manage to play a full season, he should hover around a point per game. So have him scoring 75 points. I think that's very possible. Barrett Hayton, as the number 1 center playing with those 2 guys on his wing, should have a much better, more prolific breakout season, if you will. 65 points, I definitely think is in the cards for him as breaking out as, for right now, that number 1 center. Matias Maccelli, one of the better playmakers on the team, should probably hover around 60 points. If he, doesn't hit a sophomore slump. Hopefully for his case he doesn't, because he's very much needed to provide offense for that Coyotes team. And then 5th, I got Logan Cooley. I think he has that offensive upside. He is the future number 1 center on this team, in my opinion. But as of right now, he'll probably be playing in a second line role, but he should probably push for north of 55 points. I think he'll be in the running for the Calder Trophy. It's a +1 year for him. So, he didn't make the team, or he didn't make the NHL right out of the gate. He went back to university, but now as a 19-year-old, he's developed another year. I think he's going to be NHL ready for sure and going to be a pretty productive player right out of the gate. He has that offensive ceiling. So I definitely think he's in for a huge, huge rookie season. If Bedard, maybe his season doesn't work out, maybe look at Logan Cooley potentially being the Calder Trophy favorite, but we'll see there. So look, I think the Coyotes are improved. They're going to play spoiler a lot of nights. I think they have the potential to maybe show some flashes of brilliance and really show the league what this team could become in the coming 2-3 years. But as of right now, I'm still not sold on them being a playoff team. But in that Central Division, who knows? Anything's possible. But as of right now, I got the Coyotes 6th in the Central. Now, getting into the more competitive tier in the Central, 5th in the Central, I'm going with the Nashville Predators, 36, 34, and 12 for 84 points. I think they're kind of a mediocre team. I'm not exactly sure the direction they're heading in as well. Given their offseason, it seemed like they added some solid pieces to make them just as competitive. I know they nearly made the playoffs last year, but I'm still not sure exactly where this team's going. Buying out Matt Duchene and then trading Ryan Johansson, but then turning around and signing Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen and all those guys. And, what was it? Gustav Nyquist, who's an older veteran. Dennis Gurianov's decent, but it's a weird team to judge for sure. Again, like I mentioned with the Coyotes, with this Central Division, there's always a possibility for an opportunity to arise for a team like the Predators to maybe sneak into the playoffs because of how good they are defensively, with Roman Josi leading the way, and Ryan McDonough and Alex Carrier and Dante Fabro. They have a lot of solid guys. Tyson Barrie's decent, top 4 guy as well. And UC Saros is a top 5 goalie in the NHL who will always give the Predators a chance to compete every single night. A lot of guys on that offense that need to step up and take over as the next line of fire for the Predators. Guys who really had some underrated seasons last year, but can they replicate that over a full season? That remains to be seen. But in terms of who's going to lead the way offensively, I think there's no question Philip Forsberg and Roman Josi are the top 2 guys. Starting with Forsberg, he's had some injury issues over the last couple of years as well, but if he's fully healthy, I don't think he'll be a point per game, just because I think the offense overall is going to struggle for Nashville, but him alone is capable of scoring about 70 points and over 30 goals, so I think that's about right. Josi, I think his offense is probably going to take a dip compared to I know 2 years ago he was almost 100 points, and this past season he was around a point per game, maybe a little bit under, so I think he'll struggle a little bit more, but still he should be a 20-goal guy in my opinion, about roughly 70 points. He's still one of the better offensive defensemen in the league. Ryan O'Reilly is now the number 1 center on this Predators team. He had a really rough season, especially with the Blues this past year, and he was a little bit better with the Leafs. But I guess, in an elevated role, he's definitely the number one center on Nashville. He should be in for about 60 points. I wouldn't be shocked if he was. Thomas Novak is another guy who was near a point per game, shockingly, after spending the first half of the season in the AHL. I think he's a full-time NHLer. Obviously, he proved that, but sustaining that production over a full season, I'm not sure if he's capable of that. Maybe he can prove me wrong and be like a bright spot and be a huge reason why the Predators' offense is not as bad as people are predicting it to be, or at least how I'm predicting it to be. But, I'll be modest. I'll say maybe he can hover around 60 points, be a little bit in between. I don't think he's going to, decline tremendously, but he's not going to be, sustaining that production from last season, I believe. And then Juuso Parson rounding out the top 5. I think he is capable of having a low-key breakout season, getting roughly 50 points. He showed some skill last year, some signs of light, being one of the better young players on the team. Evangelista is another guy that I could see having a low-key breakout offensive year. So there's a lot of interesting pieces on this Preds team offensively, but overall, I don't think it's good enough to make them a contender. The Predators are just a team I never know where to judge year in and year out. And just looking at the lineup, they just kind of seem like a mediocre team. The offense is not good enough for me. Yes, their defense is fine. Goaltending is amazing. That's why they're going to be competitive, because those pieces on their roster are going to keep them afloat, and they're definitely going to be in the hunt for a playoffs, but ultimately, I don't have them making them. I have them 5th in the Central Division. Coming in 4th in the Central Division, another team that is definitely going to be in the hunt for the playoffs. I'm going with the Winnipeg Jets, 38, 31, and 13 for 89 points. However, I do have 5 teams coming out of the Pacific making the playoffs, so only 3 teams in the Central I believe are going to make the playoffs, which means I unfortunately have the Winnipeg Jets just shy of the postseason. Honestly, this is another team that I feel like their direction of where this team is going is a little bit in question. Certain guys on this team reportedly not sure if they see themselves signing there long-term, like Connor Hellebuck and Mark Scheifele have been in some rumors as guys that maybe the Jets could be looking to move on from, or if they re-sign them, then that puts them back in a good position to make the playoffs. But as of right now, if they get off to a so-so start, I could see them selling off assets, which is why I think the Jets could be a team that's on the outside of looking in come April. But I still think this roster is good enough to at least contend for a playoff spot, if not get in. I mean, last year they made the playoffs. They had 95 points. I could very well see them having a similar good season because they still have a really solid roster on paper. Obviously, Connor Hellebuck is a top 5 goalie in the NHL. Defensively, they're not the greatest, but they do still have some decent pieces. I mean, Josh Morrissey having the breakout offensive year he had. Does he replicate that? I'm not so sure, but he's still, he's proven he's one of the better blue liners in the NHL, obviously. And up front, their forward group is still among the deepest in the league, especially after the assets they got in return for the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade when you add Alex Iafallo and Gabriel Velarde to just make that Jets team that much deeper up front. And you still have Kyle Connor, who's one of the better goal scorers and overall players in the league. Mark Scheifele is still a number 1 center. Nikolai Ehlers, fully healthy, is a top line winger in my opinion. Now again, if they get off to a hot start, then obviously I would expect the Jets to make the playoffs because I don't think they're going to be in a position where they would want to sell off assets. If Connor Hellebuck indeed doesn't want to re-sign or Mark Scheifele neither, that's a team that you look at and maybe you say, I think maybe they actually want to buy at the deadline and maybe go for one more run at the Stanley Cup because, if those guys aren't going to resign, at least try to go for it if you're in position to contend for a playoff spot and potentially a Stanley Cup. So, it's going to come down to how this team is off and running, how they start out the gate, their season. But again, if they don't get off to a good start, that's where I feel like there could be a little bit iffy throughout the season. If they saw off assets, it definitely would push them out of the playoffs. But in terms of their scoring leaders, Kyle Connor is clearly their best offensive talent. He should have north of 40 goals. I think 85 points is about right. Scheifele, I think he should return to that point per game pace he was on earlier in his career. Last season, his numbers were down statistically in terms of his points, although he had a career high in goals. I'm not sure if he's going to score 45 plus goals again, but he should still hover around a point per game. I think his assists will go back up and still should be roughly a 30-35 goal guy. Nikolai Ehlers, if he's healthy, should push for about 70 points. I still think he's one of the more underrated players in the league. He just needs to stay healthy and prove that he could still be that offensive threat. Josh Morrissey, I think he had, 76 points last year. I have him having 60. It's a bit of a drop-off, but I don't think he can sustain the level of play he put up this past year. It was just unbelievably crazy, the statistics he put up. I don't think he's going to do that again, but still will be among the leading scorers among blue liners. And then Cole Perfetti, like I said, I think he's poised for a breakout season. Could get north of 50 points. Maybe he gets even more. And, if he has a big 70-plus point breakout season, that could be a huge reason why the Jets are still among the better teams in the league and maybe get into the playoffs because of it. Like I said, if Connor Hellebuck doesn't want to stay there, if Mark Scheifele doesn't want to stay there, if they get off to a bad start, sell off assets, I'm just questioning where this team is going overall, which is why I have them just barely missing the playoffs. But I definitely think their roster is more than capable of sneaking in, especially in the Western Conference. Maybe they can do even better. The Jets are always a team that's wildly disrespected across the league. And I guess I'm betting on them missing again, but not by much. They're definitely going to be in the hunt. I'm just not sure about the direction. And if things go south quickly, it could get ugly pretty quickly as well. So that's why I have the Jets missing. I got them fourth in the Central, but I only have 3 teams making the playoffs out of the Central. So the Jets just fall short in my eyes. Now getting into my top 3 teams in the Central Division. Third in the Central, I'm going with the Minnesota Wild. I don't think they're going to have quite as good of a season as they did last year, but I still have them making the playoffs considering how weak the Central is. I think their team is good enough. Have them with a 44-29-9 record for 97 points. I'm not exactly sure how good their offense is. I think their offense is kind of more so average or middle of the pack. However, I think defensively they're solid, and I think they have incredible goaltending with Philip Gustafsson, in my opinion, is a Vezina candidate this season. So I think with the stingy defensive play that the Wild do possess, and they do have some very good offensive players, obviously, I think the Wild are good enough to make the playoffs. Not an elite team by any means, but I definitely think the weaker division definitely benefits them to being a top 3 team in the Central. But the one thing that always worries me about the Minnesota Wild is what can they do in the playoffs? Because I look at the other 2 teams in the division, I don't see the Wild beating any of those teams in a playoff series, which is why the Wild, sadly, they kind of just look like they're stuck in this, good territory where they make the playoffs, but they're nothing more than a first-round exit in my eyes, especially with the cap constraints, buying out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. They kind of don't have a lot to work with. They can't really do much for the next couple of seasons to improve their roster. So right now they're kind of just stuck in this no man's land where, they're good enough to make the playoffs, but what can they do once they get there? Given the offseason, they definitely lost quite a bit. I mean, a lot of the guys they gave up that they lost in the offseason were rentals, the John Klingbergs and Gustav Nyquists of the world. But, Ryan Reeves, I guess, is not a huge loss. He's kind of just a fourth line enforcer, obviously. Sam still had some decent production there. He was used as one of their top centers, but now he's gone. And Matt Dumba, they also lost in free agency, but he was kind of not the player he once was this past season. Their only really key addition is Pat Maroon, is probably just going to be plugged in on their fourth line. So they really did nothing to improve their blue line or to improve their offense. Their offense is basically about the same. Still don't have a true number 1 center unless a guy like maybe Marco Rossi breaks out, which I hope for his case he does. But in terms of their top 5 scorers, I mean, Kirill Kaprizov is the guy on this team. He'll probably push for 50 goals and 100 points. I think he's just that dynamic of a player. I mean, he's had over 100 points in the past, but I think because I don't think this Wild offense is going to be as good as it was in previous years, that's why I don't think he is going to inflate his numbers quite as much. Matt Boldy is someone, however, I think is going to take another step forward. I mean, he had over 60 points this past season, over 30 goals. I think he can take another step forward and maybe push for a point per game and be one of those bright spots on the offensive end for Minnesota that keeps them relevant there. Matt Zuccarello, I think, is going to slowly start to dip his production because of his age, but he still is one of the better playmakers on the team. His goal scoring has never really exceeded over 20-ish. He's had one season, I think he had 26, but overall he's not really a big goal scorer, so his point production will come through his assists, setting up Kaprizov for a lot of goals. And then Joel Eriksson Ek should push for around 60 points as well. Had a very underrated offensive year. I didn't think he was capable of that, but he definitely has the potential to be, one of the better two-way centers in the league. And Ryan Hartman, if he is centering the top line, he should get his numbers. He's not going to, light the world on fire offensively, but 50 points seems achievable. But overall, the Minnesota Wild are a very solid team, and they're more than capable of making the playoffs, especially in the Central Division and in the Western Conference. The opportunity is right there for the taking for them to be a top 3 team once again in the Central. However, where they go from there in the playoffs, that remains to be seen. But still, I think they're comfortably a playoff team, and that's why I have them third in the Central. Getting into my top two in the Central, second, I got the Colorado Avalanche with a 50-26-6 record for 106 points. They're obviously still a top 10 team in the NHL, an elite team, elite players at basically every position. Only 2 years removed from a Stanley Cup championship. And I mean, given the roster, the talent that they have there's no question that there is the potential that they could return to that glory and get back to another Stanley Cup championship. Now, their offseason was kind of up and down. Like, the additions they made were not bad, but they did lose some pretty key pieces. Basically kind of just recycled their middle six, replacing JT Compher with Ryan Johansson as now their new second line center. Not really sure where that goes. I think they're about the same players. Ryan Johansson has had, struggles staying healthy. And even when he is healthy, hasn't quite been the player he has been, in past years with Nashville. And even, since being with Columbus, that was probably the best stages of his career. But anyway, Ross Colton, I do think, is a great addition to be on their third line center. So now they got some really good center depth. McKinnon, Johansson, and Colton as your top three centers. You need to build down the middle to be a Stanley Cup contender and a Stanley Cup championship winning team. And the Avs certainly address that. And they look like they're in a much better position to contend for a Stanley Cup than last year was a little bit disappointing. So they replaced Alex Newhook with him. And then replaced the guy in their top six. Evan Rodriguez left for Florida. So in turn, they brought in Jonathan Drouin, who's had some injury issues as well from Montreal and hasn't really been as consistent as we would have expected him to be because he still has a very high offensive IQ. But, if he is skating on the top line with Mikko Rantanen and Nathan MacKinnon as projected, he could be in for career offensive season. I hope for his sake that he does. I'm a huge fan of his, and I want him to see him do well as a Habs fan. But I wish him nothing but best in Colorado. If he can reunite with Nathan MacKinnon, bring some of that offensive magic that they had in the CHL. I still think their offense is pretty good. Obviously, defensively, they're one of the better teams as well. When you have Cale Makar, Devon Toews, and Bowen Byram leading the way, all three of those guys are easily top 25 defensemen in the NHL, arguably top 20. And also in goal, they're actually not bad. Alexander Georgiev proved me wrong. He proved that he is indeed a starting caliber goaltender in the NHL, and he had a really good season. So I definitely think he can replicate that. Given the defense in front of him, I think he's in for another very solid season. Top five scorers, really no surprise here. Nathan MacKinnon's going to lead the way if he's fully healthy. Should be a 120-ish point player. He's just that talented. He'll be probably top three in NHL scoring. And Mikko Rantanen, I think he should push for 50 goals again. He had a great season last year. He stepped up when MacKinnon was down with injury. I still think he should probably hover around 100 points. He's just that elite of an offensive talent, one of the better wingers in the NHL, no doubt. Cale Makar is obviously the best defenseman in the league. He's very good defensively, very underrated defensively. And offensively, obviously, he can light the world on fire. I think he's going to be over a point per game this season like he was this past year, even though he was a little bit hurt. I think 90 points is definitely in the cards for him. He could potentially be a defenseman, the next defenseman that could hit 100 points like Carlson last year. He definitely has that ceiling to be an elite offensive defenseman, or a lot more elite than he's been to this point of his career, which is still elite. And Nichushkin should be fourth, hovering around 70 points. He was near a point per game this past season, despite the injury troubles. And of course, just, surrounded with the talent that he's going to be playing with in Rantanen and MacKinnon or Lehkonen or whoever, really. This team is really good offensively. So Nichushkin's definitely going to benefit from that. And that's why I have Drouin as well in the top five. If he's on a top line with MacKinnon and Rantanen, he is going to feed them a lot of pucks. That's why he has a lot of assists. He usually is a pretty good playmaker, so he should hover around 60 points. It really comes down to if he can get his goal scoring up, but if guys like MacKinnon and Rantanen can put him in a better position to score some goals, I think that's why that production is going to elevate him. That's where the production will come from, and that's why I think he could be in for a career offensive season playing with those guys and getting north of 60 points. Let's see what happens. Bit of a hot take. I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with that, but I'm just excited to have him prove people wrong. So like I said, the Avs are still an elite team, a Stanley Cup contender, deep at basically every position. They're going to be in the running for a Stanley Cup once again. However, I do not have them as the best team in the Central. So by process of elimination, winning the Central Division, I'm going with the Dallas Stars, 56-19-7 for 119 points. Not only do I have them winning the Central, not only do I have them winning the West, but this is the best team on paper in the NHL, in my opinion. And as a result, I believe they're going to win the President's Trophy. Already an elite offensive team, already a solid, steady defensive team, and they have Jake Ottinger between the pipes, who's, unquestionably a top 10 goalie in the NHL. You can make the case he's top 5. But anyway, this team is just loaded, just deep at every position, and they got better this offseason by adding Matt Duchene to complement their top 9 or top 6, and that just makes them that much deeper of an offensive team. But, you already got Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn. Seguin's still solid. Jamie Benn had a, really good bounce back season. I don't know if he can replicate that 70-plus point season that he had, but still already a lot of solid options there. Mason Marchment, add some more depth in Craig Smith and Sam Steele. And of course, you got your big guns, your top line in Jason Robertson, Rope Hintz, and Joe Pavelski leading the way. This is a very deep offensive team. And on defense, Ryan Suter's still solid. I expect a guy like Thomas Harley to maybe have a breakout season, but Miro Heiskanen is their best defenseman on both ends of the ice. I think he's going to have an amazing offensive season, and he might even be my pick to win the Norris Trophy. I think he's just that amazing of a defenseman. Always a guy that goes a little bit underrated. It's time for people to recognize who Miro Heiskanen is, because he had an underrated season last year. He had well over 70 points. In terms of their top 5 scorers, Jason Robertson's going to lead the way. 115 points, 50 goals. Just given how good the Stars are going to be offensively, or at least how they project to be offensively, I think he's going to have an even better season than he did last year, which is why I think he's going to have north of 110 points. Which is why I have him scoring 115. He's going to be among the league leaders in scoring and probably a top 5 favorite to win the Hart Trophy potentially. Rope Hintz, I think, is going to be over a point per game. I think he's another guy that's extremely underrated, one of the best two-way centers in the game, and is a guy who can contribute north of 40 goals. So I have him scoring 41 goals, 88 points. He stepped up in the playoffs. He was their leading scorer in the postseason. So he's a guy that has another level to give offensively, which is why I think this is the perfect opportunity for him to do so. Miro Heiskanen will be a point per game. He's one of the best offensive defensemen in the league and a great defensive defenseman as well. He can do everything on the ice, and he's just that elite of a player. Like I keep saying, he's just so underrated, and I hope that he has a monstrous season and people start to put respect on this guy's name. Joe Pavelski's the one guy I think maybe takes a little bit of a dip offensively given his age, but still, if he's playing on the top line, 70 points is a given for him. Matt Duchene will round out the top 5 in scoring. Like I said, I think Ben maybe takes a step back offensively, but Matt Duchene is still young enough where he could hover around 30 goals and north of 60 points if he's playing in the top 6. I think he should still be in for a really solid offensive season as their second line center, or at least maybe if he's playing on the wing, he'll be a top 6 player for sure and producing like top 6 numbers. So overall, I'm very high on the Stars. I think they have the best roster in the league. I think they're winning the President's Trophy. Best team in the Central Division by far. I think they're going to run away with it and potentially a favorite to win the Stanley Cup. They're definitely among the front runners to win. So looking for a huge season from the Dallas Stars. Now, if they, underachieve, they're going to make me look stupid. But I really am high on this team, and I think they have all of the pieces, all of what it takes to be that elite team, that team that could actually get over the hump. Western Conference Finals appearance last season. Maybe this season is their year. With that, that is going to wrap up this video of my Central Division standings predictions for the 2023-2024 season. As always, let me know what you guys think of my predictions in the comments. Do you agree with this list or do you disagree? As we're going to continue doing these standings predictions, I got the Eastern Conference coming up next. I'm going to do the Metro and then the Atlantic and rank those divisions from 8 through 1, worst team to best team. So stay tuned for those videos. So thank you guys so much for watching this video once again. Had a blast doing these. Click like, click subscribe if you enjoyed. The support means the world. And I'll talk to you in the next video. I'll see you guys later.